Surprise! It's an extra episode because I don't want to fall behind. Um, I've lined up the chapters of this book with when my schedule later in the year starts. Um, so I just wanted to come back real quick and finish chapter 10. We only have like a few pages. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I don't expect really anyone to be here because it's not my usual streaming time. That might actually be a good thing. So just real quick, let's finish up part 2 of chapter 10, and then I'll be able to start tomorrow at 11 a.m. PST, usual time for chapter 11. So before I was so rudely interrupted, thrown off my mojo last week, in chapter 10, Carmen finds out that they have taken her clothes, and Lucy is excited to present her with frumpy, dorky maternity dresses that belong to God knows who. And that she goes downstairs and everybody's complimenting her, right? Not because she actually looks good in any sort of fashion sense of the word, but because her clothing shows that she is submitting more often to the hive mind and is resisting less often than she used to. So she's downstairs talking about how she wants to see a mirror, but they don't allow mirrors in the family. Roger shows up out of nowhere. Roger, remember, was the older guy who is a pastor, who participates with the Boy Scouts, whose mom died and all of that. So I'll start where we left off last time. Halfway through the jolly evening, Reg suddenly, I guess his name is Reg, not Roger. Reg, same difference. Halfway through the jolly evening, Reg suddenly appeared in the hall wearing a sheepish expression and carrying a large brown battered suitcase. He had come to stay. He'd met a very negative reception from his lay brothers, and already there'd been talk of taking the Boy Scouts away from him because he'd insisted on talking to them about Satan, and it had given some of them nightmares. He told Carmen when she asked him that he'd found a lot of trouble holding conversations. No one had seemed to be able to grasp any of the principle when he had sat down to explain it to them. In fact, he had found himself becoming belligerent and didactic, and they had accused him of being brainwashed. It had been a terrible experience. What had shocked him most was the awful, rigid conformity of their views. Their hostility had appalled him, based as it was on prejudice and blind bigotry. What's more, he had kept hearing the songs playing over and over in his head, as though the family were in the room with him. "There's nothing out there, Carmen," he said. "Nothing at all. That's what I discovered. The world is here." The old brown suitcase contained his mother's best willow-patterned china, each piece meticulously packed in newspaper. He was going to donate it to the family. She realized that it was a very significant gesture to him. What good was it sitting on the dresser, just sitting up there so I could get a selfish pleasure from looking at it? Now it'll be used, he said. Now it'll be enjoyed. He waved his hands expansively. Now it won't just be mine, it'll be everyone's. Technically, he shouldn't have been allowed to join the course 2 days late, but they considered he'd already made sufficient spiritual growth to overcome the handicap. Carmen thought his growth was quite secure. His gray eyes were as blank as tiddlywinks. He seemed to think that it was markedly auspicious that there were 21 pieces to this tea set. 21's like a holy number. Moonies have people do 21-day conditions all the time. It's like the holy numbers are 3, 4 for some reason also. Maybe to sort of take the number 4 away from Japan as a creepy number. Like in Japan, the number 4 is equivalent to the number 13, to the point where like hotels in Japan sometimes won't have a 4th floor in the same way that some old hotels in America won't have a 13th floor, because otherwise no one will rent those rooms. And then other holy numbers are like 7, 21, 40 for some reason, and then any multiple of those. Your mum would be pleased, she told him awkwardly, and she turned away because she thought she was going to cry, and she couldn't even explain to herself what it was that caused the ache inside her chest. Reg's rebirthday was marked by a cake. He was so touched by the warmth that surrounded him that he made another of his emotional speeches and again burst into tears of helpless pleasure. If it made him happy, she thought, who could wish it away from him? As she watched his big red face crumple with expressionless joy, she wondered where else a man like Reg, who needed love but had probably lived without it for years, would have found such support, such a generous outpouring that could meet his needs and more. Maybe the family wasn't such a bad thing after all. I like how her internal narration is slowly getting brainwashed. Like she's not even confiding in us. Like, they all sang for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, and then Reg announced that he wanted to give his mother's house to Reverend Moon. People clapped uproariously as he cut his tiny misshapen cake. Peter had given his car. It was a piece of family history that a couple who had come looking for their young daughter had joined and given a whole farm complete with land. The daughter had subsequently left and devoted her young life to working for Satan, trying to get her parents out. But still, Reg's little terraced house was not to be sniffed at, and many of the guests had only their bank accounts to give. She could tell from their regretful faces that they envied him, that they longed to have something more valuable to offer than just their. I'm going to try to keep this anecdote respectfully anonymous because it's not really my story to tell. But I've got a friend in Portland whose family I grew up with, like in the same Portland community. Their dad is from Japan, and his family's actually extraordinarily wealthy. And so when his mother died, so like my friend's grandmother died, um, my friend's parents got an inheritance, she got an inheritance, and both of her brothers got inheritance money. Maybe I should say the word inheritance, like inheritance 10 more times. Inheritance. No, but they got large sums of money from their relatives in Japan. My friend invested it wisely. Her brothers made their purchases for themselves, and her parents, without batting an eye, turned around and donated like $100,000 to all of their inheritance money to Reverend Moon. And I remember seeing their names engraved in marble inside of a statue that is roughly shaped like a clitoris in the brainwashing center that is Chungpyeong, Korea. And the only thing her parents really got back besides that engraving was a little medallion that they hang up on their wall now. And then after like chastising her and her siblings for not donating their money to the church, her parents now ask her for money to cover their rent. And what's crazy is in Chung down all of those statues and all of the things they said they needed money for to build new ones for no reason. Just because they don't like those old ones anymore. So I 100% believe that people have given houses and given cars and given everything they have. When the film show started, they sat in reverent silence watching the massed rows of brides and grooms that filled the screen. There were 700 brides for 700 brothers, or so it seemed to Carmen. In fact, it was 1,800 couples who were getting married. The lines of sisters in their wedding veils looked like so many ribbons strung with blossom, and the brothers were stripes of black threaded in between. And there on the podium, with light rays coming from his every movement, was Father, in a white ecclesiastical gown of silk and a high gold ornamented paper crown. Mother, too, was blessing the couples as the snake of brides and grooms wound its way up to the stage. It was a strange and awesome sight. So many people, and Father's face taut and strained as though he was summoning up some deep internal power. Carmen sat forward, hunched with concentration, studying his face at every close-up. She wanted to know if he was the Messiah or just a mad and evil man. He looked like neither one or the one thing or the other, only very tired, someone with enormous responsibilities that weighed him down. And it was just the look that Jesus might have had, but even Jesus hadn't been required to command mass scenes on this scale. My parents went to one of those blessing ceremonies. They got so large to the point where I don't think they even invited people up on stage anymore. They just had everybody stand there with their spouse in their identical dresses and gowns and just shout Manse and hold their hands up and say the same phrases, and then they all leave. The church makes billions with a B, billions of dollars every single time they have a mass wedding because they charge each individual several $1,000s to attend. Um, and the relative like net cost of those events is shockingly low, right? So that's billions of dollars of profit. Like, yeah, they have billions of dollars in total. They make millions easily. And that's only like one stream of revenue for them, honestly. It's just like fast cash. They can tell everybody they're having a matching and blessing like a few months before the fact. They just tell everyone to come. They just send a few emails, let members get really excited about organizing the event, and then without selling any actual product, they just throw a really weird party with wedding dresses and make millions of dollars. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by a cactus. I don't even know if you can hear me like playing the thorns of this cactus like a musical instrument. Um, it's like you think the Kardashians have buying power, right? Where like anything they post on their Instagram account, people will buy. It's like, bitch, Reverend Moon didn't even need a product. He was just like, you're all invited. Give me all of your money. And everyone's like, okay. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm allowed to come here. Please take my money. Please take more of my money. Crazy. The commentary drawled worshipfully on. Many of them have never met before. This is the commentary. Many of them have never met before, but after the blessing, the miracle becomes more and more apparent that God has been planning this meeting all along. Master, knowing God's heart and will for every one of us, has brought together two people, and their mate has been created specifically for them. And the camera panned along the blank-eyed, happy couples in their going-away clothes, the nationalities all carefully mixed and matched. She tried to think it through, but the more she turned it over, the more she began to make that mental shrug. So, in many Eastern countries, parents chose the marriage partners for their children. Was it so terrible? That's what I was told word for word growing up, that Americans are weird for not having arranged marriages, and that, Jewish people, Middle Eastern people, all types of cultures have been doing this for centuries. And any hardly ever saw their husbands, what with the 40 days separation marriage and then the diverse missions that blessed members might be given. Yeah, even after you like remain celibate until your blessing. Oh, hey Ed. Even even when you remain celibate before your blessing, you still cannot touch your spouse for another 40 days. So you're not actually having sex until 40 days after your arranged marriage to the one person you will ever have sex with. And then when you do have sex with that person 40 days afterward, there are instructions for specific sex positions you have to do for the first 3 days. Because this is a sex cult. The Moonies are a sex cult, and you are in denial if you try to argue otherwise. They control your sexual expression. They define you by your sexual status. They have instructions for how you can have sex and when you can have sex and with whom you can have sex and why you're having sex and what you're supposed to feel about sex. This is a sex cult. Okay. Pamela had spoken of the blessing as the ultimate reward, which they might not even dare to hope for. It was only available to perfected members who had worked for the family for at least 6 years. The joy of perfected love surpasses human understanding. It can transcend great distances, so powerful and intense, a love that it can even So powerful and intense a love that it can even transcend total separation. It is these perfect couples who are the hope of the human race, restoring Satan's bloodline to its intended purity, cleansing the taint of original inherited sin. They said taint. Wild. Like, oh, yep. Couldn't touch for years. As the camera panned across the faces, Carmen sat back and tried to think it through. She supposed it didn't matter who they married. A Mooney was a Mooney was a Mooney. They were all the same. Once the imperfections and the individualism were erased, the married couple couldn't find their interests incompatible because they had no interests. Only the one overriding, overpowering interest to make the rest of the world just like themselves. And all at once, it seemed to her that the thing was possible. It was just difficult to comprehend because the scale of the undertaking was so vast. She remembered the 200 gingerbread men that she had on baking trays that afternoon, each one identical with its neighbor, glazed with its two blank currant eyes. I have a feeling one day that's going to be you and me up there wearing white, Lucy whispered softly, and just as her hand groped to twine itself with Carmen's, Carmen was on her feet and walking mechanically towards the door. Outside, the light was fading, and the setting sun hung suspended, bigger than she had ever seen it, like an enormous orange disk. She wandered down past the flower beds, across the playing field, and down to where the sun glinted fire off the jagged twists of the barbed wire fence. On the other side of the wire, on the other reality, the black and white cows were grazing close at the edge of the farmer's brackish pond. Beyond them, the landscape seemed to stretch to infinity, broken up here and there with screens of trees. On the horizon, the plain trees stood like cardboard cutouts, a dull purple against the deepening red of the sky, and behind them she could see a road where tiny cars streaked by in a reality which was different from the one which contained her. She's beginning to feel the difference between the mooniverse and the outside world. The cows were chomping with placid absorption, and as she drew near, they looked up, still chewing, and considered her. One of them grew curious and bold. It began to amble heavily towards her, and she bent to pull up a clump of dock leaves and held them out. The cow's hooves were caked in mire, and it had nothing on its mind but grass. She didn't look at a cow, she told herself, and believe in the family's. She couldn't look at a cow, she told herself, and believe in the family's reality. The family's reality could only be sustained when you were not looking at anything so prosaic or so poetic as a cow. It came close enough for her to see the pimples on its great pink tongue, but it stayed just out of reach, salivating wistfully, as if there was good reason why it couldn't make contact with her, as if the cow too saw the invisible divide. There were no words for the sensation she was trying to dispel. Maybe no one had ever needed words for it before. The sensation of their reality, indescribable, unless it was the visual equivalent of the hard-edged plastic chemical smell of television sets in a shop. That was the nearest she could get to it. Yet if she inhaled with all of her senses open, she could smell manure and loam and fresh mown grass, so the analogy could make no sense. Maybe it was like being suspended in amber liquid, seeing everything through a slightly yellow filter, with her brain slowing all its signals and her limbs registering the numbing paralysis that one experienced in dreams. And yet, when she stilled her perceptions and tried to recapture that sense of chemical reality again, her senses perceived only normality and told her everything was fine, and that she had perfect control over her movements. So it was she who was misreading perfectly normal signals and translating them as somehow sinister. It was she who was off balance and out of tune and somehow wrong. If she compared the here reality with the there reality, they were visually the same. So maybe everything was really okay, but some part of her brain was still sensation. When there was nothing to get spooked about, now would be a good time to go. Immediately, before the gingerbread men were wheeled out with the tea urns. Even as she watched, the great ball of the sun was slipping down behind the trees, taking the grandiose pyrotechnics with it, dimming the sky to a melancholy violet dusk. She felt like someone on a fairground cakewalk, with the floor moving rapidly away beneath her feet. When the normal laws were reversed, you put your hand out for something stable and solid, but when Carmen reached her hand out now, there was only the family waiting to support her, rigid and unbending, immutable as a rock. As real, more real than the reality that was running away beneath her feet. "Oh, honestly, what on earth's the matter now?" called Lucy's anxious voice, and there she was stumbling gamely towards her across the grass. I was wondering when someone was going to follow her. "I think I ought to tie you down with elastic. I never know where you'll get to next." As the little hand closed like a vice upon her arm, Carmen felt the chill of evening in her blood. So there are two thoughts coming to me so far. I just didn't really want to interrupt that monologue she was on for a second. Um, every second generation I know has proved that you cannot stifle a person's personality forever. No matter how hard the Moonies tried, they could not breed their children out of ever being gay, out of ever being horny, out of ever being curious. And a lot of blessings fall apart. That was a lie I was told constantly, that like arranged marriages in the church had a higher rate of success. They don't. They don't at all. And that was part of like what led me to leave when I moved to the East Coast was like I guess they had so many members on the East Coast. They didn't even really bother to keep track of who was staying married to who or keeping breakups a secret. So it was really shocking to me when I found so many people who had been matched and blessed multiple times and found that it didn't work. That was like To me, that was like being told that the Earth was only 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs never happened and then finding a fossil, you know? Like, luckily for me, I was educated, in evolution and told to trust science textbooks. Just don't trust what people say, about the purpose of humanity and what's really going on with our current human society since Jesus, and since Adam and Eve. But, like, there were things that were hidden from me, a lot of things. Books like this, for example. Um, and then also just the fact that arranged marriages fell apart constantly. And if they didn't fall apart, there were even more arranged marriages that are miserable and abusive, and they refuse to get divorced because they think they can't. And I'd say that's probably worse than getting a divorce. Staying in a completely loveless relationship that neither of you are happy with, that's toxic for everyone, including the children involved. Um, so that came to mind. The Moonies would love to believe that a Moonie is a Moonie is a Moonie, and that you should be able to neglect yourself to the point of being able to love anyone, but you're not supposed to be able to love anyone. Like, your needs and your desires and your past trauma and your skills and your talents and your interests, you are supposed to honor those, and you are supposed to have boundaries. You are supposed to have a list of deal breakers, and you are not supposed to be with everyone. Sometimes you are supposed to get divorced. Sometimes you are supposed to make mistakes that you learn things from. That's healthy. And I fundamentally reject the concept that a marriage has to last forever in order for it to be beneficial, or that human relationships have to last for eternity in order for them to mean something or to be good. Some things are meant to be short lived and are better if they're short lived. And some relationships should not have been forced at all. What was the other thought? Mm, oh, yeah. So, right now, Carmen can feel herself letting go of real reality and out there reality. Uh, and she's trying to describe how it feels to be sort of giving up on resisting and just surrendering entirely to the Mooney reality. Um, and I think part of why I was so upset last week is because the discussion I participated in a private Facebook group for ex Moonies, I was so dogpiled by people who disagreed with me, um, and being like saying things that are obvious to me now, and just the way that they were pushed back in my face so adamantly. I think after so many decades of mental abuse during the most formative years of my life, um, my relationship with my mind is what has been the most violated. My relationship with trusting that I can make good decisions and that I can be correct, that I'm allowed to win, that I'm allowed to be fantastic and contribute good, unique ideas. I'm not just someone who's supposed to shut up and be quiet and be a receptacle for other people's realities. Like, that's what I struggle with the most. I think me listening to my body and respecting my body's impulses, even if that means telling someone like, "Yep, I guess I am satanic. Go ahead. Everything you heard about me is true, bitch. Go ahead. I don't know how to explain it. My body is screaming at me right now, and I'm going to listen to my body more than I'm listening to you because I have to live in this shit, okay? I have to live in this meat suit. I get to live in this meat suit with this body that I love so much. And right now, my body is screaming too loud to listen to all the hateful mental abuse you have to fling at me right now. But my relationship with my mind and my ability to trust my own decisions is what has been violated the most. Just gaslit to the point where I don't want to think for myself because I'm afraid I'll mess it up or get something wrong. That's what I struggle with the most. George says, a week ago, I went to visit my ex-partner who is still in the Korean cult, and she was so busy with cult work that she wasn't allowed to talk to me, so I left her a letter for her to have someone. Yeah, compatibility in marriage is a whole other ball of wax. Oh, just to have someone out there for her. Probably it may be some help in the future. Honestly, my thought to get someone out of a cult, the Ted Patrick method is the best. The way of love is good, but takes longer. I don't know who Ted Patrick is, and I don't know what the Ted Patrick method is. Is that the guy who developed a series of questions that sort of unbrainwashes people after he joined a cult as a mole and realized he was about to give all his shit away and realized they were using sleep deprivation? He didn't join the Moonies, but he like invented deprogramming. I'll have to figure out who that was. I don't remember if the name was Ted Patrick or not. Oh, and the reason I stopped to address those two thoughts is because when she said, I think I ought to tie you down with elastic, there's an Instagram account called I Want To Riot, run by a Japanese second generation Moonie. Oh, Ticket to Heaven used the Ted Patrick method. Perfect. Yeah, I think I like the Ted Patrick method too, from what I've seen. That ending scene, that deprogramming scene, like changed my life. I had to rewatch it a bunch of times. It like helped me understand why I behaved like the main character as he was being deprogrammed, but like by myself out and about in the world without realizing I was deprogramming myself. And that's why I was so like confused and scared and exhausted and emotional. I was going through the deprogramming process in a really slow, one tiny piece at a time kind of way. And I kind of wish I'd had people who cared about me enough to isolate me in a room and use the Ted Patrick method and tell me that it was a cult and give me like an exit interview and then give me a great big group hug afterward and then let me move in with them and take it easy. Take it easy. Take it easy for like 6 months to a year or more and reintroduce into society when I have a more stable grasp on reality. Instead, I had to piece together my own Ted Patrick method or just like get hit with impactful sentences once every few weeks and sort of work a 9 to 5 job as I'm sort of an emotional wreck being deprogrammed. That was a mess. Oh yeah, what was I going to say? There's an Instagram account called I Want To Riot run by a second generation Japanese woman. Her parents found out she had a boyfriend in high school, so they shipped her off to Chungpyeong. And they really hated her for having a boyfriend, so she continued acting out in Chungpyeong. And then when her dad was like trying to control her whereabouts at Changpyeong and she smacked his hand away because he was trying to grab her and drag her somewhere, he said, "That's it, you're getting committed." And she was involuntarily manhandled and shoved into the hospital in Changpyeong and tied to a bed and given medications. They didn't tell her what the medications were. She saw that other beds in the hospital had charts that directly said what was wrong with each person, and her bed had no chart whatsoever. She was held there against her will, being medicated against her will, in solitary confinement, talking to her friends through the window. And she was allowed to leave when she like calmed down. And it's just so disgustingly reminiscent of what people did to women back in the day all the time when women had the audacity to like get angry or be horny or anything. They would just call it hysteria and they would involuntarily commit women until they shut the fuck up and submitted to the men in their lives. So that's immediately what jumped to my mind when she said, I ought to tie you down. Moonies do that. Moonies tie down their own children and drug them until they shut up and cooperate. I used the 63-year slow burn method, right? Like, I'm tired of a slow burn. I think that's why I've been attacking my mental health rehabilitation for the past couple years. I never know where you'll get to next. As the little hand closed like a vice upon her arm, Carmen felt the chill of the evening in her blood. The chill of evening in her blood. Carmen, Carmen, always smoking. Heavenly Father doesn't want to live in an ashtray. If you pollute your body, then Heavenly Father can't get in. You don't have any doubts, do you? Asked Carmen flatly, drawing on her cigarette. Ooh, calling her out on her bullshit. Lucy stared at her solemnly for a moment and then regretfully shook her head. Of course not, she said simply. No one in the family has any doubts, or why would they be in the family? That is verbatim the exact opposite of what she said earlier. She said we didn't have doubts. So which one is it, Lucy? Are you saying you're not human anymore? Make up your fucking mind. See, that's how you can really identify narcissistic mental abuse, is because they say whatever they need to say to win an argument in the moment, regardless of what they've said in the past or what they might want to say in the future. They say whatever they need to say to win the moment, even if it sacrifices making sense. Because she doesn't care about making linear sense and being a consistent, rational person. She cares about getting her sister Carmen to do whatever she wants her to do in that moment. Carmen's eyes roved abstractly over to the outhouses. The brothers were building a high bonfire. She could hear the burr of their conversation and the cracking sound as they dragged and stacked the wood. Of course she should have known it all along. There had never been the remotest possibility of getting Lucy back. Lucy was fixed forever on the other side of that line, as unreachable as a fly in amber. And all the clues and signs that Lucy had fed her, the little glimpses of vulnerability, they had all just been calculated fragments of emotional blackmail. Now you're getting it, sister. But you said you wouldn't be human if you didn't have doubts. She said it quite remotely. Lucy laughed lightly. Oh, that. Yes, but I thought you understood. We're growing to perfection here. It's our human frailties that have to be erased. If you're wondering why my banner says Faith Yen being human again, Carmen nodded. She felt as though she'd swallowed a living black bird, and it was beating its wings in panic in her chest. She had the feeling that her world was shrinking, and that every way she turned her head, another avenue would close. Lucy was asserting proudly that she wasn't human, and since Carmen didn't doubt it any longer, she turned and walked determinedly towards the outhouse where her identity was hanging on the drying rails, looking innocuous, pretending to be just a line of plain clothes. Yeah, clothing and representing yourself and makeup is important to your psyche. So, so important. You can't leave now, you can't, Lucy entreated as she flitted in Carmen's shadow like an insistent toddler. Carmen continued, nevertheless, to move methodically around the machines of the laundry room, collecting up wet woolens and jeans and adding them to the pile that was in her arms. What's the big sudden hurry? I just don't see why it's suddenly so urgent. I don't feel safe, Carmen muttered. Lucy stared at her aghast. You think it's safe outside? She shouted. The next moment, she was bolting off through the door like a frightened rabbit, out into the darkness. Carmen supposed she was making for the house to consult with someone higher up. And that's where I had marked to stop. Shit. I guess I didn't finish chapter 10. There was going to be a part 3. And all of these pages are going to take an hour or more. I'll go back and change the title. So this is like part 2.5. Chapter 10, part 2.5. Tomorrow at 11 PST, I'll finish chapter 10. Oh, look, another comment in the chat. I like this username. It says, the username is audacious fuckboy who can't take a hint. And audacious fuckboy who can't take a hint says, thanks for reading, Faith. Your voice is hypnotic, and I'd be lucky to pay $3 million for a shot glass of your bathwater. After learning your story and hearing the crazy events in this book, I've decided to change my ways and address my own insecurities by finding myself in the Himalayas. I intend to ask a shaman how I can accept my micro penis for what it is, or at the very least, how to stop burdening the rest of the world with my pathetic first world problems. Before I go, Jesus, this guy wrote an essay. Before I go, I was wondering, how does it feel to be a member of the superior sex? If you could say anything to recovering fuckboys like myself and actually be heard, what would you say? And finally, do you prefer PayPal or Cash App? You don't even have to send bathwater. I just think women deserve reparations for all the bullshit I have personally enabled, and I will start with you if you like. Wow. Look at you, audacious fuckboy who can't take a hint. It looks like you took a hint. I'm flattered. Congrats on the growth. I appreciate these thoughtful questions. I gotta be honest, I've spent so long fighting to be taken seriously as a human being, even though I have tits, that I almost don't even know what to say now that someone's actually listening to me. I guess just real quick, I took a physical anthropology class in community college that changed my life. And I realized that women are not necessarily the superior sex, but it is scientifically proven that we are the original sex, and that in all forms of life on the planet today, the idea of having half of your chromosomes outside of you and only exists to store a bunch of, that's an evolutionary afterthought. And there are plenty of species on the planet that still can reproduce in and of themselves. Like there are animals that can, amphibians and sort of like swampy lizard creatures, limbs like ours that we descended from billions of years ago. There are still other like distant cousins of ours that can change their sex at any given moment. And if they're in a group and there are too many females, they can change their sex and become male. They can impregnate themselves, just give birth by themselves. So I don't think there is a superior sex, but women literally are the original sex. And the only reason we have this narrative in society that men are the default and that women are extra is because or at least what I've been told is that when the like agricultural, I almost want to say agricultural revolution. I don't feel like there was a revolution in the same way that there was like a factory revolution, industrial revolution. But like when society changed from hunter-gatherers, where everyone just like to their strength and nobody really thought about male or female supremacy, when we switched to agriculture, all of a sudden men started to realize like, hang on a second, I'm working all day and all night to make food for the people I live with. We don't travel anywhere anymore. And I don't actually know if this woman that I'm shacked up with is having my child or someone else's child. That is what most professionals agree is kind of the genesis of men dominating women, men abusing women, men owning land and overpowering people and saying, I own this woman, you're going to wear a ring or an actual shackle because I don't know what a DNA test is. We haven't invented the Maury show yet. And I need to know for damn fucking sure that I'm going to be giving all of this stuff that I've been accumulating and cultivating and maintaining. I want to make sure I'm passing it down to someone who's carrying my genetics and not some random dude that you went and had another kid with, you know? And then the Bible happened. The Bible is really just a diary for a He-Man woman haters club. Like, the Bible is one of the most toxic, disgusting books I've ever seen in my life. And it started this lie that men came first and that women are somehow the rib of a man. That is literally the exact opposite. Like, women are the original sex and men are an evolutionary afterthought. And if you want daily proof of that and you're a man, just look at your nipples. Look at your completely useless nipples that are not attached to mammary glands that will never make milk for anyone. Why do you have nipples? It's because every human child starts as a girl in the womb. Every human fetus is female. Every penis is literally, you can look this up, all right? Look it up. Every penis is an inside out uterus. And every set of testicles are inverted, exposed, extremely delicate ovaries. And when the Y chromosome came in and switched all that stuff up, they're the same body parts. In fact, gender as we know it is a social construct, and there are plenty of people who are born intersex with like some combination of like their genitals didn't quite get turned all the way inside out, or they have mammary glands and a penis. But that concept is so upsetting to the very capitalist, commercial, indoctrinated world we live in now that doctors, without a second thought, will just decide which sex this child is and snip, snip, create involuntary, non consensual sex surgeries for children. Um, what else was the question? If I could say anything to fuck boys and actually be listened to, I would say it is not my job to educate fuck boys. It's not any single woman's job to suddenly become a spokesperson for every woman. And it is not my job to bear the burden of proof when a fuckboy is the one who is supposed to be taking responsibility for his own education. And the same goes for racial issues. Race, by the way, is also a societal construct. Every living, upright humanoid today is technically descendant from the same black woman in the Fertile Crescent area of Africa. So technically, I'm an extremely pale black person, you know, and so is every other white person. And it's like, in the same way that I would never ask a black person to suddenly become a spokesperson for every black person, and I would never necessarily ask a random black person who is not a self-proclaimed expert or activist. I would never ask that person to like give a blanket statement to every racist person. I am not going to give a blanket statement to every fuckboy who needs to be taking responsibility for himself, doing his own emotional labor and doing his own research. Do I prefer PayPal or Cash App? My PayPal is faithyen@gmail.com, faithy3n@gmail.com. I also have a Ko-fi page. I'm setting up a Patreon, and I just downloaded a Cash App yesterday. So I'll include those in the links below. Ed Kaufman highly recommends the book from Daniel Quinn, Ishmael. Angela, hey, Angela Vulgar. Biology is fascinating, and my psych and bio classes have completely changed how I view gender. So much unlearning of the gender binary system we grew up in. It just, yeah, and it also sucks that like so many businesses and industries are built around the lie that like you can predict a person's behavior based on their genitals. Like there's emerging research um, from the 2000s, from even like 4 or 5 years ago, that shows that like every human brain, regardless of your physical gender presentation, like every human brain is a very unique mishmash or mosaic of masculine and feminine traits. And it showed, I just remember seeing this in like a scientific journal that my friend was showing me, another ex cult member. She's like, did you see this? Like, we've assigned all of these different, you know, qualitatively neutral human characteristics as male or female characteristics. But if you just look at the characteristics by themselves, there are tons of women who have a lot of male characteristics. There are tons of men who have a lot of female characteristics. And most people are a very unique, confusing combination of all of them. And to me, that perfectly explains why you can have people who physically look male, but don't like they have a penis, but they don't feel comfortable presenting male in the way that society has decided for us that men are supposed to behave. And it explains to me why people can feel called to transition between genders and literally pay for hormone replacement therapy to help their outside presentation match their internal mosaic of characteristics. And it's frustrating to me that like science, the scientific community has all of these answers, but society, the capitalist world we live in, where people have to make a living and people are entertained by getting in fights with other people, and people don't want to change old habits of thought that they've had for forever and get really emotionally attached to outdated modes of classifying people, like we're sabotaging our own progress. We're killing each other over stupid shit that's already been disproven. That's just really sad to me. And I think that's why anthropology is really, really cool. And getting a higher level education instead of being forced to stay home and be a stay-at-home daughter slash housewife in training, it doesn't appeal to me at all. I want to get a higher education. Higher education. I just read an article talking about Native American traditions where they totally accept the male spirit in the female body and vice versa. Yeah, and they have people who are two spirits, who are both male and female at the same time. And the same goes for different native tribes in Africa, different people in like Afghanistan and like Iran. Like there have always been human beings who defy what society insists has to be the way that things are, because for a long time we didn't have the science or the technology to understand ourselves, and we sort of just made stuff up that sounded good. And now that we have the science to actually show us how things really are, we now have to sort of unlearn all of these toxic narratives that were made up hastily to explain things we didn't understand. Well, this was fun. 49 minutes. I'll be back. Chapter 10 tomorrow. I'm surprised how many people showed up. I was like, no one's going to be here. No one's going to be on YouTube. I forgot we're in a pandemic and everyone's on the internet all the time. All right, y'all. Have a good one.